breaking news from the Supreme Court.
Major ruling on affirmative action.
Affirmative action in college admissions last week.
You've been searching the web and you've been looking for a good take on the recent Supreme Court ruling on affirmative action that eliminated affirmative action in college admissions, and you haven't been able to find a good video of good analysis because, big surprise, most people on Al Gore's internet don't give good analysis.
Reading the 14th Amendment, seeing the verbiage in the 14th Amendment, understanding that race and discrimination that takes place because of it should play no role in American society, I can understand the courts making a decision, it being supported.
Analysis is rather mid, if you ask me. So you've come to the right place. You've come to the right place.
You purify yourself in the waters of Lake Minnetonka.
Let's get into it. First of all, the analysis that I've been hearing from other places have been completely irrelevant. Typical analysis, typical liberal center-left analysis talking about affirmative action wasn't perfect, but we needed a band-aid and blah, 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 blah. The Supreme Court ruling was a step back for civil rights and the fight for justice and more of that liberal nonsense.
To end racial discrimination is to stop taking race into account.
These aren't the important questions that we should be asking. The important question is, what does this mean historically for the efficacy of reform? The Supreme Court ruling yet again has reminded us of the persistent thread of white supremacy woven into the fabric of our nation's judicial system. The Supreme Court on Thursday, June 29, 2023, ruled against race-conscious admission policies of Harvard College and the University of North Carolina. This decision is being thought of as monumental, but really, it's just another echo in the long history of rulings that prioritize maintaining racial hierarchies over creating a more equitable society. Well, what type of racial hierarchy? The racial hierarchy of white supremacy.
The legal reason was not to try and basically right the wrongs of our society. It was not meant to try to help people who had faced systemic discrimination. The point was to help all of us by creating more racially diverse student bodies.
And until you understand white supremacy, everything else that you think you understand will only confuse you. So what is white supremacy? White supremacy is the local and global system and dynamic, structured and maintained, principally by persons who classify themselves as white, whether consciously or subconsciously determined, which consists of patterns of perception, logic, symbol formation, thought, speech, action, and emotional response, as conducted simultaneously in various areas of human activity, including but not limited to economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war. It is a system predicated on devaluing humans with a relentless tilt towards discrimination and violence. And when we talk about we live in a certain society that upholds a type of white male dominance, you have to look at this particular Supreme Court ruling as part of the continuum and the shift to undo the gains made in the 60s and the 70s.
All we say to America is be true to what you said on paper. If I lived in China or even Russia or any totalitarian country, maybe I could understand some of these illegal injunctions.
So this also can be understood as continuous with the recent attack on abortion rights. And so it's critical to assess what's happening as a historical case study of the limitations of reform as a political tactic and overall strategy. We have to reassess our ideas about progress. This idea that we're on a linear trajectory towards a better society, and that over time, if people just contribute to policy decisions and making new legislation, we'll eventually get to the promised land. There are more critical, more far-reaching critiques that suggest otherwise. Even Michelle Alexander said, "We have not ended racial caste in America, we have merely redesigned it." And when you look at the arguments presented by Chief Roberts, they show a type of color blindness and an insistence to ignore the historical reality of the United States, and to operate all of a sudden on the basis of racial neutrality, despite the evidence that systemic racism is alive and well. There was a 2017 report by Prosperity Now and Institute for Policy Studies. The median Black household wealth is forecast to hit 0 by 2053. So this suggests that the trajectory, on the contrary, is not facing upwards towards a brighter society, but that the system itself is doubling down on white supremacy. And so our analysis should be that our society is fundamentally white supremacist, including the Supreme Court. If you look at the case of Dred Scott versus Sanford, where Dred Scott was living in a free state and decided to sue for his freedom, Chief Justice Roger Taney, in his ruling, said that Black people had no standing in the courts, and that Black people had no rights the white man was duty bound to respect. This is why it's important to know our history. And you might say, oh, that was in 1857, so that was a long time ago. But that's precisely my point. Nothing has changed. So like Fyodor Dostoevsky said, above all, don't lie to yourself, bruh. And it ain't like the society is just racist against Black people. This society has had a long history of being racist towards Asians and folks of Asian descent, which makes this particular ruling and the structure of this ruling particularly backwards. In this ruling, powerful forces tried to pit Asian applicants against Black applicants in colleges like Harvard College and the University of North Carolina, in order to suggest that Black applicants were taking positions in the school away from them because of affirmative action. That's nonsense. First of all, this society has had a long-standing racist attitude towards folks of Asian descent. You can look at the Japanese internment during World War II, the Chinese Exclusion Act, even Vincent Chin and his murder in 1982, where he was brutally murdered by 2 white auto workers in Detroit who blamed Japanese competition for job losses in the United States auto industry, and light sentences were given to those perpetrators. You can even look at the outbreak of COVID-19. There's been a rise in hate crimes and discrimination against people of Asian descent, fueled by harmful rhetoric and misinformation blaming them for the virus. Yes, it is true that East Asians do very well academically and do very well on standardized tests, but the use of SATs has been debated because the correlation between being a good student and SAT scores is dubious at best. The data suggests that after the first year, students with lower SAT scores catch up and oftentimes outperform their counterparts who scored higher on standardized tests in later years. Because there are many things that go into being a student that standardized tests like the SAT cannot test for. Things like study habits, motivation, time management skills, financial stability, mental health, creativity, leadership, resilience, and so on and so on. So the ruling itself might be better looked at as a sign of a white supremacist society rebounding and resetting itself after the limited gains of the 60s and the 70s. This also shows the lasting impact of the Trump presidency, and including his influence on the Supreme Court, and how he was able to load up the Supreme Court with a bunch of conservative right-wing judges. This is not necessarily a call to flee back to the Democratic Party, which itself is corporate-backed and known for only offering a few crumbs of incremental change to its supporters. But it does suggest that the left needs a reevaluation of electoral strategy And while it's important that there's less reliance on it, harm reduction does have its place. But that should never supersede the need to build independent structures, parties, and groups. This is one of the reasons I fundamentally critique centrists who view society as fundamentally good but rough around the edges. This view is misguided and leads to the idea that policy change and legislation will eventually fix society.
However, that we're making progress in this country and worldwide?
No. I will never say that progress is being made. If you stick a knife in my back 9 inches and pull it out 6 inches, there's no progress. If you pull it all the way out, that's not progress. The progress is healing the wound that the blow made. They won't even admit the knife is there.
But the issue is that Chief Justice Roberts, who wrote the majority ruling, grew up in a racist society, and he has a racist worldview. And that just doesn't happen just through policy or legislation. White supremacy in a society is dispersed not just through the institutions and the government, but through culture, social norms, and attitudes. Edward Said said culture is a sort of unconscious government that has formed people over many generations. So that is the reality of white supremacy that we have to change. And if you're not talking about radical change, you don't have serious analysis. And so that's my take on the recent Supreme Court ruling on ending race-conscious admissions. Now we can talk about what we have to do, and I'll unpack that in future videos. But right now, I want you to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Every time I get a new subscriber, there's more motivation to keep these videos going. And for now, I just want to make sure that you're asking the right questions. And fundamentally speaking, we have to ask ourselves the question, what does this mean for reform as a tactic? You may say, damn, this is some brilliant analysis. Where'd you learn all that? And I remember when I was in the library back in the day, and one of my friends saw me and he said, damn, bro, you always in the library. Well, you know what Brother Mousson from The Wire said.
You know what the most dangerous thing in America is, right? Nigga with a library card.